The sun bled over the Arizona desert like a wound that refused to close. The air shimmered above the sand, and the sound of crows filled the lonely sky. Miles away from any law or kindness, a small ranch sat on the edge of Apache land, a place people called the border of damnation. It was here that Ethan Cole, a quiet rancher with a haunted past, lived alone after years of war and loss. Ethan wasn't born a saint. Once, he'd ridden with soldiers who burned villages and took things no man had the right to take. But war leaves stains deeper than blood. After what he'd seen, he laid down his rifle and swore never again to raise his hand against the helpless. He built fences, raised horses, and spoke little. The locals said he was mad. The Apaches said he was cursed. Then, one night, 3 riders came, soldiers drunk on cruelty and victory. They brought with them 2 young Apache women, their eyes hollow and bodies broken from the long march. They laughed as they threw them to the ground before Ethan's porch. Payment, one of the soldiers slurred. They're yours, the chief's daughters, taken fair in a raid. We figured you might need company. Ethan didn't speak. He just stared at the women's trembling hands, at their bruises, at the way they refused to meet his eyes. The soldiers waited for him to smile, to gloat, to show some hint of the monster they thought he was. But he didn't. He only said one word: leave. The laughter died in their throats. They called him a fool, a coward, a man who'd forgotten what men were supposed to be. When they finally rode away, the silence left behind was heavier than thunder. Ethan knelt beside the women and untied their wrists. He gave them water, food, and his cabin, while he slept outside under the stars. Days passed before they spoke to him. When they did, it was with trembling voices. They expected cruelty. What they found was care. Each dawn, he'd bring them bread and firewood. When they asked why he helped them, he said, "Because I once destroyed what I should have protected. I won't make that mistake again." They didn't understand his words fully, but they understood his silence, the kind that came from guilt too heavy to speak. One night, as the fire flickered, one of the women, Naya, whispered through tears, "Why don't you take us? They said you would." Ethan looked at her, not with desire, but with sorrow. "Because you're not something to take," he said quietly. "You're someone to set free." That night, both women cried, not from fear, but from something they hadn't felt in years: dignity. Outside, the coyotes howled across the desert, and Ethan stared at the stars, praying that somehow his small act of mercy could balance all the sins he'd once committed. As dawn broke, Naya and her sister began to trust him. Slowly, the scars inside them started to fade. But word spread, and the soldiers who'd gifted them weren't pleased. They came back, and this time, they weren't laughing. The wind carried dust and doom. Ethan knew what was coming. The soldiers would burn his ranch and drag the women back into darkness. But he wasn't running this time. He stood on his porch, rifle in hand, as the riders approached. "You had your chance," their leader sneered. "You could have had both of them. Now we'll take them, and your land too." Ethan's eyes were cold. "You'll take nothing from me ever again." The first shot cracked like thunder. The battle was brief, brutal, and righteous. Ethan fought not for glory but for redemption, every pull of the trigger a prayer. When the dust cleared, the soldiers lay still. Ethan, bleeding from a wound to his shoulder, dropped his rifle and sank to his knees. The women ran to him, crying. Naya pressed her hand against his wound. "Why did you fight for us?" He smiled faintly. "Because no one fought for me when I lost everything. Because a man's worth isn't what he takes, it's what he protects." They helped him inside, tended his wounds, and for the first time, laughter returned to that lonely ranch. Not joy, but peace, the kind born from pain and forgiveness. Weeks passed. The women stayed to work beside him. They planted new crops, mended fences, and rebuilt hope. The neighbors who once mocked Ethan began to respect him. The Apaches, hearing what he had done, came to his ranch not with weapons, but with gifts, grain, horses, and a single feather, laid at his door. It was their symbol of peace. Ethan never saw himself as a hero, but when he looked at the sunrise, he felt something lift from his soul. The past no longer chained him, and the 2 women, once captives, stood beside him, free. As the wind carried their laughter through the canyon, the land itself seemed to heal. Ethan turned toward the horizon, whispering, "Maybe there's still good left in this world." if a man's brave enough to do what's right. And so ended the tale of the rancher who refused to touch what wasn't his. A man who proved that mercy can be stronger than desire, and that even in the cruelest land, humanity can still rise like dawn.